I can never forget that terrifying night in 2003. Fresh out of college and full of dreams for the future, I had just started working as a programmer at an IT company in the city center. Determined to prove myself, I often stayed late at the office. That night was no exception. I was so absorbed in coding that I lost track of time. My eyes grew heavy, and when I finally glanced at my watch, I froze. It was nearly 2 a.m. Hastily, I packed up and headed downstairs. The office district was eerily quiet at that hour, the dim street lights casting long shadows that only emphasized my solitude. Back then, ride-hailing apps did not exist yet. If you needed a taxi, you had to wait by the roadside and hope one came by. The chilly autumn wind bit through my thin jacket, making me shiver. I regretted not bringing something warmer. The streets were deserted, with only the occasional distant bark of a dog breaking the silence. After waiting for nearly 20 minutes, my feet were numb from the cold. Just as I was about to turn back, defeated by the biting cold, a pair of headlights pierced through the foggy darkness. A taxi, moving almost unnaturally slow, emerged like a specter from the shadows and came to a halt in front of me. Its headlights cut through the darkness like a beacon. It was an old white Santana, its paint peeling and the word "licensed" faintly visible on the yellowed sticker on the window. Such cars were common back then, so I didn't think much of it. I opened the door and got in, immediately hit by a faint, musty smell. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the driver. He wore a face mask and a dark baseball cap, leaving only his murky eyes visible. His gaze was fixed lifelessly on the road ahead. I gave him my address, and without a word, he nodded lightly and started driving. The car moved forward with a creaking sound, the tires groaning against the asphalt. It wasn't long before I realized we were heading in the wrong direction. I lived in a new development in the east, but the taxi was going west. "Driver, you're going the wrong way. You should be heading east," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But he remained silent, and instead stepped on the gas, speeding up. The car zipped through dimly lit streets, the familiar landmarks replaced by decrepit old buildings. The modern skyscrapers faded into the distance, and the few remaining streetlights flickered with an unsettling bluish glow. My heart began to race, a foreboding sense of dread washing over me. The taxi turned into a narrow alley, the surrounding buildings towering so high they almost blocked out the sky. Along the roadside were rows of abandoned taxis, their rusted frames resembling metallic coffins glinting under the moonlight. A foul stench, reminiscent of stagnant water, filled the air, bringing back memories of an abandoned parking lot I used to pass as a child. I swallowed hard, my palms slick with cold sweat. I glanced at the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at the driver. That's when I noticed something horrifying. A few strands of stark white hair poking out from under his cap, as if untouched by sunlight for years. Even more disturbing was the deep scar on his neck, as though it had been slashed by something sharp. Rubbing my eyes, I tried to dismiss the image as a trick of the light. But when I looked again, the driver's face in the mirror was featureless, replaced by a writhing shadow. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone to call the police or a family member, but there was no signal. Trapped in an unfamiliar place, all I could do was watch helplessly as the taxi plunged deeper into the darkness. The temperature inside the car dropped sharply, and I could see my breath turning to mist in the frigid air. Frost crept across the cracked windows, and a faint rustling sound came from beside me. Turning my head, I froze. At some point, 3 hunched figures had appeared in the car. They were draped in tattered clothing, their heads bowed so low their faces were hidden. My heart nearly stopped, and it felt as though my blood had turned to ice. I stared at them, unblinking. They didn't move, rigid, like 3 lifeless corpses. Then suddenly one of them slowly raised its head. What I saw made my stomach churn. A face long decayed, flesh rotted away, with hollow eye sockets that stared straight into my soul. My terror reached its peak. Trembling, I desperately yanked at the car door, but it wouldn't budge, as if welded shut. From the back seat, the corpses began to emit low, guttural moans, and the stench of death grew unbearable. Just then, The driver turned his head mechanically. His mask fell onto the steering wheel, revealing a face that was fully decayed. Rotting flesh clung to exposed bone, and glowing green flames flickered in his hollow eye sockets. His mouth twisted into a grotesque grin as he rasped, "Do you know why you could still hail a taxi so late at night?" The car accelerated wildly, the speedometer needle shooting past 180 kilometers per hour. The corpses in the back seat suddenly sat upright, letting out ear-piercing screams. Their rotting hands reached for me, the smell of decay suffocating. I twisted and dodged, but there was nowhere to hide in the cramped space. The driver laughed maniacally, jerking the wheel back and forth as the car skidded dangerously along a winding mountain road. Through the frosted windows, I saw the guardrails ahead were broken, beyond them a sheer drop into a dark abyss. Overwhelmed by the fear of death, I summoned every ounce of strength, grabbing the safety hammer beside me and smashing the window. On the third strike, the glass shattered. Cold wind roared into the car, dissipating the nauseating stench. Just as the taxi barreled toward the cliff edge, I leapt out of the shattered window. My body hit the ground hard, rolling painfully across the asphalt. Behind me, the car plunged into the abyss with a deafening crash, taking the driver and his ghastly passengers with it. The next day, I woke up in the hospital, my body covered in bruises and bandages. The doctor said it was a miracle I survived the jump from a speeding car. Despite the pain, I felt immense relief to be alive. The police soon visited me with a chilling revelation. The road I had been on was infamous for a series of grisly murders in 1994. A taxi driver named Zhao had lured late-night passengers to an abandoned village where he killed them. 3 decomposed bodies were later found in a derelict parking lot, the same figures I saw in the back seat. Even more horrifying was Zhao's end. He had driven his white Santana off a cliff, but neither his body nor the car was ever recovered. Local legends claim that on some nights, a decrepit white Santana still roams the area, its interior filled with ghostly wails. Only then did I realize the taxi that night wasn't ordinary. It was Zhao's cursed car, carrying him and his vengeful victims. As I lay in the hospital bed, the events of that night replayed in my mind. The driver's rotting face, the corpses in the back seat, the bone-chilling cold. It was all real. From that day on, I never stayed late at the office alone, nor did I ever hail a random taxi at night. Now it's 2025, and old Santana taxis are a rare sight. Yet every time I hear the faint honk of a car in the dead of night, a chill runs down my spine, reminding me of that cursed ride and the horrors I narrowly escaped. But some say that in the city's older districts, a battered white Santana still prowls the streets at midnight. If you see one with a license plate starting with 4227, remember this: no matter how late it is, don't get in. Even now, the faint honk of a Santana's horn echoes through deserted alleys. The deranged driver is still out there, searching for his next passenger. In a remote town, there was a bustling restaurant. The owner was a widow in her 40s named Lan, who had been running the place alone since her husband passed away years ago. The restaurant was famous for its various dog meat dishes: braised dog meat hot pot, stewed dog meat. Each dish was a feast for the senses, earning endless praise from diners. Lan's kitchen was run by a man in his 50s called Master Wang. Everyone in town knew they were having an affair. Master Wang was incredibly skilled, especially at preparing dog meat. Every dawn, he would ride his tricycle out for procurement. He not only caught stray dogs, but would also scatter drugged meat near residential areas to specifically trap people's pets. Most chillingly, they didn't even spare pregnant dogs. It was said that Master Wang had developed a special duo platter, turning unborn puppies into a dish served alongside the mother's meat. Despite its hefty price, there were always people secretly ordering it. Until one day, an elderly man in gray clothing entered the restaurant. He emanated a subtle beast-like aura with golden flickers in his eyes. "Do you know what you're eating?" he asked in a deep voice filled with suppressed rage. That pregnant golden retriever was one of our kind. I am an elder hound serving the mountain fox spirit, sent to seek justice for my kin. Those 6 little lives in her womb should have had their own beautiful futures. The customer's laughter died instantly. The old man continued. She came to me last night. She said she was in pain. Her puppies were in pain. She showed me her wounds. Electrical burns on her neck. Her belly brutally cut open. Before he could finish, dog barks suddenly erupted from the kitchen, followed by Master Wang's screams. People rushed in to find him convulsing on the floor, bleeding from every orifice. His neck and abdomen bore dog bite marks, his entrails seemingly ripped out by some force. From that day on, bizarre incidents began occurring. Every night, people could hear the howls of mother dogs and cries of puppies. Lan kept dreaming of being surrounded by dogs, some wearing collars, some with swollen bellies, their eyes filled with hatred. More terrifyingly, she began seeing unformed puppies in the restaurant's meat. A month later, Lan disappeared. Police discovered a horrifying scene in her basement. Walls covered with dog collars, some still bearing owner's contact information. Piles of dog bones filled the corners, many belonging to unborn puppies. When Lan's body was found, her entire abdominal cavity had been hollowed out, just as he had done to those mother dogs. The old man vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. But since then, people passing the restaurant at night would hear an orchestra of dog barks and a woman's screams. They say it's Lan's soul being eternally hunted by the dogs she killed. Even more disturbing, some claim to have seen a blood-covered golden retriever mother leading a pack of puppies through the ruins, all bearing human faces, Lan's, Master Wang's, and those of customers who had eaten the duo platter. In a remote mountain village in western Sichuan, there was an elderly woman named Granny Li, who lived alone in an old house on the edge of the village. It was a typical old Sichuan-style residence, with green bricks and gray tiles, a pair of stone lions at the entrance, and a few ancient scholar trees growing in the yard. Villagers often whispered that Granny Li was involved in unclean things, because strange chanting could always be heard coming from her house late at night. When Granny Li was younger, she was known as the village's go-to person for organizing weddings and funerals. She handled celebrations and mourning rituals alike. It was said that she could communicate not only with people in the living world, but also with guests from the underworld. But all of this was just the villagers' speculation, as no one dared to confirm it. Every year, on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, during the Ghost Festival, she would set up a lavish feast under the ancient scholar tree in her yard. The table would be filled with traditional rural dishes, braised pork knuckles, steamed fish, white-cut chicken, and a jar of old wine wrapped in red cloth. Tall incense sticks burned on the altar, their curling smoke looking particularly eerie under the moonlight. Granny Li always warned the villagers sternly not to come near her house on this night, saying she was hosting important guests. The older villagers all knew that Granny Li had an only son who had disappeared 20 years ago during a flash flood. Since then, she had begun this strange ritual. Some people speculated she was preparing a ghost feast for her deceased son, but others believed it wasn't that simple. In 2008, a young man named Zhang, freshly returned from the city and the son of the village leader, let his curiosity get the better of him. On a dark, moonless night, he secretly climbed over the wall of Granny Li's courtyard. By the pale moonlight, he saw a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Under the old scholar tree, seated around the table, were not just Granny Li, but also over a dozen eerie guests. They were dressed in clothing from different eras. Some wore Zhongshan suits from the 1970s, others bell-bottom pants from the 1980s, and even one in a long robe from the Qing dynasty. What terrified Zhang the most was that he recognized their faces. These were all villagers who had died tragically. Old Wang, the electrician who was electrocuted last year, Grandpa Zhao, who drowned in the reservoir the year before, Uncle Zhang, who died in a mining accident 5 years ago. And sitting in the seat of honor was a young man wearing a plaid shirt popular 20 years ago. It was Granny Lee's missing son. Granny Lee had a kind but unsettling smile on her face. She served each guest, offering food and pouring wine, muttering, "Come, try this. These were all your favorite dishes when you were alive." The guests actually started eating. Their chopsticks passed through their translucent bodies, and the food vanished into thin air. Even more chilling was that they chatted while eating, reminiscing about their lives before death. At that moment, a gust of cold wind swept through, and the bare branches of the scholar tree cast twisted shadows under the moonlight. Granny Lee suddenly raised her head and looked directly at the spot where Zhang was hiding. Her kind smile twisted into a sinister scowl as she shouted, "Who dares disturb my family feast?" Zhang was so frightened that he fell off the wall with a loud crash. When he scrambled to his feet, the courtyard was already empty. The lavish feast on the table had turned into piles of rotten, foul-smelling black water, and the air was filled with the stench of decay. The next morning, the villagers found Granny Lee dead beside the table, her face frozen in a strange, serene smile. In front of her was a yellowed ledger filled with dense records. It documented the names of all the villagers who had died unnatural deaths over the years, along with their favorite dishes. From then on, every year on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, people reported hearing laughter and chatter coming from Granny Lee's house. Even more chilling was that anyone who heard it could recognize the voices of their deceased relatives. It was said that Granny Lee continued hosting her feasts in the underworld. As this year's Ghost Festival approached, several villagers began to have the same nightmare. Granny Lee, standing by the scholar tree, inviting them to attend a family feast. In traditional Chinese funeral customs, it is believed that the living can communicate with the deceased by burning offerings like paper money and houses. During Qingming Festival and Ghost Month, households prepare incense and paper money to honor loved ones. While most offerings include necessities like gold ingots, paper money, or houses, paper dolls hold a unique place, often used only for specific rituals. For instance, when an elderly person passes away, their family may commission paper craftsmen to make a pair of paper dolls, boy and girl servants, to serve the deceased in the afterlife. Sometimes the dolls are customized to reflect unfulfilled wishes, such as meeting a lost loved one or reuniting with a departed spouse. These paper dolls are crafted with extraordinary detail, from lifelike facial features to realistic clothing, embodying the deep longing of the living for the departed. However, there is a long-standing belief. Paper dolls are not like ordinary offerings. They are thought to carry a soul, and burning too many of them may invite misfortune. After all, once someone has passed away, their spirit should rest. Clinging too much to the living world might attract unclean entities. In the old district of the city lies an inconspicuous alley called Paper Soul Alley. At the far end of the alley stands a century-old paper crafts shop. A weathered wooden sign hangs above its door, inscribed with gilded characters, "Joe's Paper Crafts." The shop owner, Mr. Joe, is in his early 50s and the third-generation craftsman of this family business. Having learned the trade from his father, Mr. Joe could craft lifelike paper dolls by the age of 10. Today, he is the most renowned paper craftsman in the area. The shop is small but meticulously organized. Wooden display cases showcase an array of paper crafts. Formally dressed paper figures, opulent paper villas, and even the latest model of an iPhone in paper form. Each piece is crafted with astonishing precision, showcasing the maker's dedication. Creating a paper doll is a ritualistic process for Mr. Joe. He insists on starting work at dawn when the sunlight is at its strongest. The bamboo skeleton must be assembled using an odd number of sticks, following the principle of 1 to send, 2 to return. The facial features must be drawn last and completed in one uninterrupted stroke. Pausing midway is strictly forbidden. The greatest taboo is painting the doll's eyes at night, as it is said to invite unclean spirits. The centerpiece of the shop is a pair of boy and girl servant paper dolls. The girl wears braided pigtails and a floral dress, her face radiant with innocence. The boy is dressed in traditional short pants, holding a paper windmill. This pair, a masterpiece by Mr. Joe, is so finely crafted that their expressions seem alive. It's said that Mr. Joe spent 3 days and nights perfecting just their facial features. Every evening, as the golden glow of sunset streams through the alley, the light seems to lend the paper dolls a lifelike shimmer. Their expressions, gentle, mischievous, appear so vivid, it feels as though they are silently observing every passerby. Mr. Joe often says that sincerity is more important than skill in crafting paper dolls. These dolls are meant not just to satisfy the living, but to comfort the dead. Before starting any project, he lights incense and silently prays. There are many taboos in his craft. Paper dolls must face east, inauspicious words must not be spoken during their creation, and pregnant women or those involved in weddings or funerals must not enter the workshop. Paper dolls are not ordinary offerings, he often warns his apprentices. They carry a soul. From the moment a doll is completed to when it is burned, it holds the craftsman's sincerity. If you're not earnest, you might invite trouble. When he says this, his expression turns grave, as if recalling something he'd rather forget. Mr. Joe's past held a memory of a rainy, somber evening, veiled in shadows and damp whispers. One rainy evening, an elderly lady dressed in a black silk chipao entered the shop. Her hair was impeccably styled, and her demeanor was elegant. Yet, as she stepped inside, a faint scent of sandalwood filled the air. Mr. Joe was painting a paper doll when a sudden chill caused his hand to tremble, smudging the paint. The old woman stood at the counter, a peculiar smile on her pale face. From her bag, she produced a yellowed photograph and requested a family set of paper dolls modeled after it. The photograph, taken in the 1980s, depicted a family of 6 in vintage attire, collared shirts and flared pants. While their smiles appeared warm, their eyes held an unsettling intensity, as if staring straight through the photo. "The dolls must look exactly like this," the old woman said in a raspy voice. "Especially the eyes. They must be lifelike." As she spoke, her gaze fixed on Mr. Joe, sending shivers down his spine. Stranger still, her shadow on the wall appeared distorted, as though it had been scorched. When Mr. Joe took the photo for a closer look, he noticed a detail, a charred mark at the lower right corner, beginning near the feet of a little girl. Just as he was about to ask about it, he looked up and realized the old woman had vanished. On the counter, she had left a stack of crisp 100-yuan bills and a lingering trace of sandalwood. That night, Mr. Joe tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Whenever he closed his eyes, the 6 smiling faces from the photograph would appear in the darkness, their eyes blinking as if waiting for something. After taking the order, Mr. Joe worked late into the night for 2 consecutive days, crafting each paper doll based on the photograph. He began with the elderly woman in the chipao, followed by her husband, and then the 4 children. As he completed each one, the doll's eyes seemed to grow more lifelike, as though watching his every move. Strange things began happening in the workshop late at night. Sometimes, after painting a doll's face, Mr. Joe would turn away to grab a tool, only to find that the expression had changed when he looked back. The once gentle smile now a menacing grimace, the eyes glinting with an eerie light. When he rubbed his eyes and looked again, the face had returned to normal. By morning, the completed dolls would have shifted positions. Sometimes they stood in a circle as if holding a family meeting. Other times they faced a corner, like children being punished. On one occasion, Mr. Joe found them all sprawled on the floor, resembling a scene from a fire. The temperature in the workshop also became peculiar. Despite the summer heat, the room would turn cold whenever Mr. Joe worked on the dolls. Most unsettling of all, the dolls seemed to grow. The little girl, crafted to resemble a 7-year-old, appeared more like a teenager the next day. The truth behind the photograph came from Mr. Wang, an elderly neighbor who lived near the alley entrance. One evening he stopped by the shop, and when he saw the photo and the half-completed dolls, his face turned ashen. "How could you take an order from the Lin family?" Mr. Wang said, trembling. Even after 20 years, thinking about it gives me chills. He then recounted a horrific tragedy. The elderly woman in the photograph, Lin Yuehua, had become mentally unstable after suspecting her husband of infidelity. On the night of August 15, 1988, she locked all the doors and windows and set the house on fire. Her husband and 4 children were trapped inside, and none survived. The youngest daughter was the saddest part. Mr. Wang sighed. She was only 7, found clutching her mother tightly at the scene. That burn mark on the photo? It started from her feet. That night, all the dolls disappeared from the shop. On the counter, a crooked note read, "Finally, we are reunited as a family." Mr. Wang claimed to have seen 6 shadowy figures walking hand in hand through the alley that midnight. Leading the group was a woman in black. But when he rubbed his eyes for a closer look, they had vanished into the dark. Mr. Zhou's shop remains open, but he no longer accepts orders for family sets. On rainy days, passers-by claim to hear faint sobbing and the rustle of paper coming from the shop. The local elders say paper crafts provide a vessel for restless souls. Perhaps these simple paper dolls truly can awaken things best left undisturbed. Now anyone walking past the shop quickens their pace, fearing the paper dolls in the window might suddenly turn their heads and flash an eerie smile. Hi there. Let me tell you a story that might just leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Xin was an ordinary girl from a small rural village. Her family's circumstances were considered above average for the area, with her father's steady city job enabling them to build a sturdy 2-story house and run a thriving convenience store at the village entrance. Her mother, a rare college graduate from her generation, worked as the principal of a local elementary school. As their only child, Xin was doted upon from a young age. Though her grades were average, Xin had a cheerful personality and was well loved by everyone in the village. In the evenings, she often gathered with her friends outside the convenience store, chatting and laughing. The elderly villagers frequently warned the young women not to linger outside at night, but Xin dismissed their advice as outdated. At 18, after graduating high school, Xin's father helped her secure a job at a government office in town. She often hung out with friends after work, strolling around town before heading home. Over the past 2 years, many matchmakers had visited her home, introducing potential suitors. Though her parents arranged for her to meet a few, none caught her interest. Life continued peacefully, but beneath the surface, forces were aligning to upend Xin's world. The night that would change her life forever was fast approaching. It was a typical Friday evening. After dinner with her colleagues, Xin stood by the roadside waiting for a taxi. She had no idea that danger was lurking nearby. Out of nowhere, a masked man sprang from the shadows and pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth against her nose and mouth. Within seconds, Xin lost consciousness. When she came to, she found herself lying in a secluded alley, her body aching all over. By this time, her frantic parents had already reported her missing and were searching everywhere. At 2 a.m., they received a call from the local police station. The officer on the other end spoke in a grave tone, explaining the situation. Xin's mother collapsed to the floor, and her father trembled so violently he could barely hold onto the car keys. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Xin curled up on the bed, staring blankly into space. Upon seeing her parents, she broke down in tears. Her parents, devastated, struggled to comprehend what had happened to their beloved daughter. Her father slapped himself repeatedly in anguish, while her mother wailed uncontrollably. The doctor explained the test results, and each word felt like a dagger piercing their hearts. News of the incident spread quickly in the village. The matchmakers who once visited frequently now vanished. While friends and relatives expressed concern, Xin became reclusive, spending her days binge-watching dramas and avoiding everyone. 3 months later, the family faced another blow. Xin discovered she was pregnant. Sitting in the hospital corridor, her parents struggled with the doctor's warning. Terminating the pregnancy might render Xin infertile. For Xin, already grappling with severe emotional trauma, this was another cruel twist of fate. In their desperation, Xin's family began considering finding someone who could accept her situation. In their small village, an unwed mother was heavily stigmatized. Her father thought of Danan Li, a simple and honest young man who had once expressed interest in Shin through a matchmaker. With the matchmaker's help, the two families quickly reached an agreement. Not only did Danny and Lee accept the circumstances, but he also proposed living with Shin's family after marriage. The wedding was held as planned, filled with warmth and celebration. Life after marriage turned out to be surprisingly harmonious. Danny was attentive to Shin and treated her parents with great respect. Before long, Shin gave birth to a lovely baby boy, whom they named Nian Lee. Watching her husband doting on their child, Shin felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. The way Danny's eyes sparkled as he played with Nian made her heart swell with gratitude and a sense of security she never thought she'd find again. Little did she know, a shocking secret lay hidden in Danny's brother's home. A paternity test report stating with 99.99% certainty that Danny Lee was Nian Lee's biological father. Life is full of twists and turns, and sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. I went back to my hometown, a fishing village in Zhoushan, Zhejiang, during my vacation. As soon as I stepped off the bus, the salty sea breeze washed over me, carrying with it the faint tang of seaweed and the briny scent of the ocean, instantly pulling me back to childhood memories of the village. Under the old banyan tree at the entrance of the village, a few elderly folks sat in bamboo chairs, basking in the sun and chatting leisurely. In the distance, at the fishing harbor, fishermen were busy cleaning their catch of the day. The smell of fish mixed with the ocean air drifted around. Fishing nets hung on bamboo poles swayed in the sea breeze, with silvery fish scales glinting faintly in the sunlight. The fishermen's routine remained unchanged, up before dawn to the roar of boat engines at 3 a.m., returning in the evenings to unload their catch and tend to their gear. That evening, I sat in the old rattan chair in the main hall of our house while my uncle made me a cup of pre-Qingming Longjing tea. As the aroma wafted through the room, he suddenly brought up a strange incident that had occurred 3 years ago. My uncle said, holding a crumpled cigarette with his calloused fingers, "Do you remember old Wang, the man who lived in that blue-tiled house at the end of the village? He used to tease you and always had candies in his pocket for the kids." My uncle took a deep drag of his cigarette, his eyes distant. He died in a bizarre way 3 years ago. Even now, the villagers shudder when they talk about it. The mention of old Wang instantly brought back memories of my childhood. He was a widower who had lost his wife early and raised his son Wang Ming alone. Every fishing season, old Wang would head out to sea at 3 a.m. Sharp, rain or shine. I still remember his green, paint-chipped fishing boat with a lantern at the stern polished to a perpetual shine. He always returned before sunset and would sit on the stone steps outside his house, mending his fishing nets. Later, when Wang Ming grew up and left the village for a trading job in Ningbo, he sent money to his father regularly. But old Wang's life stayed simple and frugal, revolving around fishing day after day. That morning, my uncle's hand trembled slightly, spilling some tea on the table. It was just before dawn, and Aunt Lee, who was out collecting seafood, passed by old Wang's house. The sea fog was thick that day, and visibility was less than 3 meters. She glanced habitually into old Wang's yard and saw a figure lying there. My uncle took a deep puff of his cigarette, the smoke curling through the dimly lit room. Aunt Lee ran over and found it was old Wang. He was already cold, with deep strangulation marks around his neck, as if something had been pulled tightly around it. The strangest part was that his clothes and hair were soaking wet, but it hadn't rained for days. I remembered old Wang's kind smile, and how he always shared candies with the village kids. The villagers said he was a gentle soul who never held grudges. But in the weeks leading up to his death, his behavior had become unusually erratic. Some fishermen saw him wandering around Mao Harbor in the middle of the night, my uncle said. Some said he couldn't sleep because he missed his late wife. Others claimed they saw him standing by the pier, staring out at the dark sea and mumbling to himself. My uncle stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray, his expression heavy. The truth is, old Wang wasn't himself during those months. He'd never been one to stay out late. but suddenly he started coming back after midnight. Some fishermen who went out at night said they often saw a Ningbo-registered fishing boat meeting with his small vessel at sea. After each rendezvous, Old Wang's boat would have several black plastic bags in its hold. My uncle explained that Old Wang's strange behavior during that time was because he'd been roped into smuggling contraband. At first, he thought he was just helping transport sea cucumbers and abalone, which wasn't uncommon among fishermen. Every transaction earned him a generous payoff from the Ningbo fishing boat. But one night, while sorting through the black plastic bags, Old Wang accidentally uncovered white powder hidden beneath the seafood. Though he wasn't well educated, he immediately recognized the substance as drugs. Panicked, he wanted to quit, but the smugglers threatened to report his involvement if he tried. The night it happened, my uncle's voice trembled. Old Wang boarded the Ningbo boat. The sea was thick with fog, and visibility was poor. He got into an argument with some shadowy figures on the boat. Then, they threw him into the sea. By dawn, as the first light pierced through the sea fog, Old Wang's body was found in his backyard. He was drenched, with a fishing net tightly wound around his neck. Villagers speculated that the smugglers had tortured him by dunking him in the sea until he was half drowned, then dragged him back to his yard and strangled him with the net. It was a brutal warning to anyone else who might think of turning them in. Later, while clearing out Old Wang's abandoned boat, the villagers discovered a sealed waterproof bag hidden in a compartment. Inside were a few photographs and an old, yellowed notebook. The photos were taken at night at Mao Harbor, showing a young man exchanging black plastic bags with several strangers. Though the images were grainy, the young man's profile was unmistakably that of Old Wang's son, Wang Ming. The notebook was Old Wang's journal. From the entries, it was clear that he'd discovered his son had been using his boat to smuggle drugs. Every time Wang Ming borrowed the boat to transport sea goods, he was actually meeting with drug dealers. Initially, Old Wang couldn't believe it, but he secretly followed his son and took the photos as proof. "My son, how could you become like this?" one entry read. During those sleepless nights, Old Wang wandered the pier, torn about whether to report his son. He knew that calling the police would ruin Wang Ming's life. But if he did nothing, the drugs would destroy countless others. The final entry, written the day before his death, read, "Tomorrow, I will go to the police. Son, I'm sorry, but this is the only thing I can do for you." But he never made it to the next day. That foggy night, Wang Ming's betrayal led their higher-ups to ambush Old Wang. They tortured and killed him to set an example. "Ah," my uncle sighed. "They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes human nature can be so cruel." The night deepened, and the salty breeze from Mao Harbor lingered. The fishing village lights flickered faintly, and life carried on as always, with fishermen rising at dawn and resting at dusk. But no one dared to walk near the sea at night anymore, afraid they might see Old Wang's spirit, still waiting for his son. Now Wang Ming is serving time in Ningbo. Perhaps Old Wang, even in death, couldn't believe his own son would betray him like that.
Subscribe to my channel.
Warning: this story is based on real events. Any illegal cosmetic surgeries may endanger your life. Always ensure you choose a licensed and reputable clinic. Do not fall for low prices. My name is Chen Yue, an ordinary bank teller. I finally escaped from that terrifying clinic, and now I must record this dreadful experience to reveal the truth to others. That day, after work, I stared at the mirror for a long time. The reflection showed a flat nose and a short chin, making me look childish and immature. The words of the blind date from last week still echoed in my ears.
"You look not very appealing."
While scrolling through online discussion groups, a cosmetic surgery ad caught my eye. New Beauty Medical Aesthetic Center. Special offer: full facial surgery for only 30,000 yuan, including post-operative care. After saving 3 months' salary, I finally mustered up the courage to make an appointment. The clinic was in an old commercial building. The hallway lights flickered, and the walls were plastered with before and after surgery photos. But the smiles in those after photos looked stiff and unnatural. The air was thick with a pungent disinfectant smell, mixed with a stench that was both metallic and chemical-like, sharp enough to make me wince. At the reception desk sat a nurse whose skin was unnaturally white, as if covered with a thick layer of wax. Most eerie was her smile, her mouth stretched so high it nearly reached her ears. When she spoke, her facial muscles barely moved.
Miss Chen,
She said softly, her voice sickly sweet.
your features are actually quite delicate, just needing a bit of adjustment. Our hospital offers an exclusive bioactive reconstruction technology, imported from Europe. It can rejuvenate your skin to baby-like softness.
She handed me a stack of glossy photos.
These are our success stories. See this client? Her situation was just like yours, and now she's completely transformed. Our technology doesn't just alter appearance, it improves skin texture at the cellular level. Right now, we're offering a VIP package including facial surgery and a Youth Forever Care program. The care program uses our proprietary stem cell nutrient serum.
She whispered conspiratorially.
Even Hollywood stars come to us. Look at our nurses, aren't they all so fair and smooth? It's all thanks to this treatment. Everything is overseen by your personal doctor, and you'll even get 2 complimentary evening makeovers. For 50,000 yuan, it's a steal.
I stared at the photos, my heart racing. The girls in the pictures were stunning, their skin smooth as porcelain. Every word she said made it hard for me to resist.
The offer is only for today. Book now, and you'll have the chance for a consultation with our director.
She coaxed. I foolishly nodded, maxing out 2 credit cards. She gave me only a few seconds to glance over the densely packed contract. Its fine print like a swarm of ants, impossible to decipher. Looking back now, those clauses probably concealed devilish traps. After signing, the nurse led me to a pre-surgery checkup. She said no electronic devices were allowed on surgery day, but I secretly hid my phone under the mattress in my hospital room. A gut feeling told me I might need it. On the day of the operation, I was taken to a grim operating room. The doctor, masked, revealed only a pair of cold eyes. In a hoarse voice, he said,
Don't worry, it'll be over soon.
As the anesthesia coursed through me, I gradually lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was in a windowless hospital room. There was only a bed, a small cabinet, and a mirror covered by cloth. The nurse said I couldn't look in the mirror until my wounds fully healed. Every day, nurses came to inject me with a so-called recovery drug. The pinkish liquid emitted a sickly sweet scent. Each injection made my skin burn, as if something was crawling beneath it. Even stranger, I began having bizarre dreams of myself as a delicate porcelain doll displayed in a glass cabinet. One midnight, I was awakened by sobbing from the next room. A woman's voice whispered, "I'm so cold. Why is my skin so hard? I can't move my fingers." Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Peeking through the door crack, I saw a doctor wheeling away a stretcher covered with a white sheet. An arm protruded, unnaturally pale and smooth like porcelain. After that night, the room next door was silent. I secretly checked my medical file and found the words, Porcelain Transformation Project, Test Subject B71. Worse, my skin began to turn unnaturally smooth and rigid, and bending my fingers became increasingly difficult. When I looked in the mirror, my face no longer had the texture of flesh, but was cold and smooth like porcelain. I suspected the clinic wasn't performing cosmetic surgeries, but transforming patients into some kind of living art. I guessed the missing patients had become exquisite dolls, displayed in a private collection. On my 10th day there, I discovered the horrifying truth. That day, when the nurse came to inject me with the pink liquid, I pretended to fall asleep. Once she left, I followed her to the basement. What I saw was unforgettable. The basement housed dozens of operating tables, each holding an anesthetized patient. Their faces were wrapped in gauze, their skin glistening unnaturally, just like the missing patient next door. A group of doctors in white coats busied themselves around one table. Hiding behind the door, I watched as they meticulously peeled off the patient's facial tissue and placed it into a container labeled Bioactive Reconstruction Experiment. A row of large freezers caught my eye. Through the glass doors, I saw neatly arranged human face specimens, each tagged with a number. Remembering the porcelain transformation project, test subject B71 on my file, I felt a chill down my spine. The experiment data on the wall was even more shocking. The dense charts recorded each test subject's reaction to the stem cell nutrient serum, degree of skin hardening, speed of porcelainization, and survival time. The clinic, under the guise of cosmetic surgery, was conducting horrifying human experiments. They lured beauty seekers with promises of eternal youth, turning them into living test subjects. Those stiff smiles in the success story photos, the emotionless receptionist, the missing patients. It all made sense now. I knew they could dispose of me at any time. Late one night, I used my hidden phone to photograph the horrifying scenes in the basement, the operating tables, the face specimens in freezers, and the experimental data on the walls. My hands trembled, but I knew these photos were crucial to exposing the truth. Just as I was sneaking back to my room, I heard footsteps. I hid in a cleaning supply closet, holding my breath. Through the crack, I saw two doctors pushing a stretcher. On it lay a woman whose face had completely turned to porcelain. Her wide-open eyes were lifeless.
Another failure,
one doctor said.
The porcelainization was too fast, and organ functions completely stopped.
Burn it in furnace number 3.
The other replied coldly.
Mark it in the records. Test subject C47. Survival time 72 hours.
Once they left, I dared to emerge. But as I reached the stairs, I ran into the night shift nurse. In the moonlight, her face appeared deathly pale, her grin stretching to her ears.
Miss Chen, why aren't you asleep?
I turned and ran. Behind me, her sweet voice called out.
Don't run. Your skin isn't fully healed yet.
I stumbled down the fire escape, hearing more footsteps behind me. They were chasing me. I dashed to the first floor and ran for the back door. My fingers, which had become stiff and unresponsive, struggled to turn the handle. Just then, I heard her piercing laughter.
You can't escape! You're already our masterpiece!
Finally, I burst through the door and called the police. But by the time they arrived, the clinic was abandoned, leaving only medical waste and a foul stench. They found the basement, but it was emptied, with only broken equipment remaining. All evidence, including the photos on my phone, had mysteriously vanished. 3 months have passed, but the memory of the clinic's horrors haunts me. Every morning, I check to ensure I'm still flesh and blood. Though my skin didn't fully porcelainize, it's unnaturally smooth and cold, like synthetic material. My finger joints grow stiffer by the day. Doctors say the changes might be irreversible. Worse, I've started seeing people from the clinic around the city. The emotionless receptionist appears at subway stations. The nurse's eerie grin flashes in shopping mall mirrors. Sometimes I receive texts from unknown numbers. Miss Chen, it's time for your skin checkup. Most terrifying, I've discovered more clinics like this one online. They use the same scripts, similar decor, and even identical receptionists. Whenever I try to expose the truth, my posts are swiftly deleted. Last night I dreamed I had turned into a porcelain doll, displayed in the clinic's basement glass cabinet. Surrounding me were other artworks just like me, their eyes reflecting eternal terror. I know this nightmare will never end. Those monstrous doctors are still out there, continuing their vile experiments.
Subscribe to my channel.
Have you ever heard a story so chilling it stayed with you for years? This is one of those stories, and it happened to my childhood friend. Honestly, just thinking about it makes my skin crawl, as if the memory refuses to let go of me. As the only person who knows the full truth, I've kept this secret to myself for years. My friend and I grew up together. His nickname was Ken. When Ken's dad was diagnosed with cancer, we were still in elementary school. During that time, I often saw his mom selling pancakes on the street. Ken would sit nearby, doing his homework. Once, I overheard his mom talking to a neighbor about how much debt they had because of Ken's dad's medical bills. Her sighs were heartbreaking. Not long after, Ken's dad passed away, leaving his mom to manage everything alone. A few months later, a man in his 50s started hanging around her pancake stall every day. He always bought something and often brought snacks or school supplies for Ken. "This guy seems nice," I naively told Ken back then. Ken didn't say anything. He just kept eating, his eyes fixed on the table as if lost in his own thoughts, refusing to meet my gaze. Later, I found out the man's name was John. He owned a small factory. Not long after, he married Ken's mom. On the surface, their life seemed to improve. John paid off their debts and even sent Ken to extra classes. But only I knew the truth. Despite the new clothes and extra classes, their smiles were strained, and their laughter sounded forced, like actors playing a happy family in a poorly written drama. One afternoon, I went to Ken's house to hang out. As I reached the door, I heard chaos inside. Peeking through the crack, I saw John, drunk, beating Ken with a belt. His mom tried to stop him, but got shoved to the ground. Her head hit the corner of the coffee table, and she started bleeding. This wasn't a one-time thing. Whenever John drank, he caused trouble. Once, he pressed Ken's mom's hand onto a hot stove, leaving a huge blister. Another time, he burned Ken's arm with a cigarette, leaving several round scars. The worst was when he locked Ken on the balcony overnight during a snowstorm. The next day, Ken had a high fever, but life went on as usual. His mom wore a mask to cover her injuries while selling pancakes, and Ken wore long sleeves to hide his bruises at school. This went on for 10 years. Ken became quieter but worked hard at school. In his final year, he got into a top university. "He finally made it," his mom said tearfully. I knew she wanted him to get away from this home. But Ken didn't leave. He chose a local university, saying he wanted to take care of his mom. Something felt off. His eyes had a strange intensity, like he was always on the verge of exploding. In his second year, right before the Lunar New Year, John died. The police said it was a combination of alcohol poisoning and a heart attack. It's a common occurrence in winter, but I'll never forget what I saw that night. It was the 28th of the last lunar month. Ken called me and said his mom had gone out to buy New Year's goods. He invited me over for dumplings. His voice was calm, and he mentioned John was drunk and asleep. I arrived around 7 p.m. Nobody answered the door, but it wasn't locked. Inside, the heat was on high, and there was a strong smell of alcohol. The TV was still on, and John was lying on the couch. At first, I thought he was just passed out drunk, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. His face was blue, his lips purple. He wasn't breathing. I called the police immediately. They said it was a typical case of drinking leading to a heart attack. According to them, drinking heavily in the cold can cause blood vessels to constrict, especially if the person already has heart problems. The autopsy confirmed it. His blood alcohol level was off the charts, and his arteries were severely blocked. A classic case of death by alcohol and heart failure. I had noticed changes in Ken since high school. He had developed a fascination with occult books and spent hours in the library's darkest corners. Sometimes, I'd see his notebooks filled with strange symbols. "What are you studying?" I once asked. "Just some old stuff I find interesting," he'd reply casually. Later I learned he wasn't just reading books. He was active on several online occult forums. From folk witchcraft to ancient spells, he read everything he could find. Once, while using his computer, I accidentally found a bookmarked dark web address. Back then, I didn't realize what it meant and thought it was just another part of his odd interests. But the truth was far scarier. One drunken night, Ken confessed everything. Over the years, he had delved deeply into ancient occult practices and folk rituals. On a dark web forum, he met a mysterious mentor who taught him an ancient ritual. The ritual required gathering specific herbs at midnight, and burning them with paper inscribed with strange runes. The smoke released a special scent. Ordinary people wouldn't notice, but it was deadly to those with a guilty conscience. It awakened their deepest fears, trapping them in endless nightmares. The visions would grow more terrifying until their heart couldn't take it anymore and stopped. That's how Ken killed John. The death looked like an ordinary heart attack caused by drinking. Whenever I think about this, I'm filled with guilt and confusion. I was Ken's best friend, yet I could only watch him suffer. Sometimes, I wake up at night, haunted by the image of John's lifeless body. The heavy smell of alcohol lingers in my mind, along with the memory of Ken's eerily calm expression. I chose to stay silent. It's a constant struggle. Part of me thinks John deserved it, but another part fears Ken has gone too far down a dark path. Now Ken works at a big company, and his mom no longer needs to sell pancakes. They live a quiet life, relying on each other. Sometimes I wonder if Ken hadn't suffered so much, or if John had been a decent stepfather, would things have turned out differently? But life is what it is. Once hatred is planted, it grows like weeds, uncontrollable and wild.
As dusk fell, Hang gripped the steering wheel, furrowing his brows. He'd been driving along the winding mountain road for over 2 hours, yet he still couldn't find his way out. His phone's GPS had long lost its signal, and all around him were nothing but dense woods. "Damn it, I'm really lost this time," he muttered to himself. Hang was a travel photographer who had come to this remote area to shoot an abandoned mountain village. He hadn't expected to lose his way in the forest. As he thought about spending the night in his car, a dim yellow light appeared ahead. As he drove closer, the outline of an old building gradually came into view. It was an inn with a faded hand-painted sign that read, "Mountain Moon Inn." The building looked ancient, but its warm lighting gave an oddly comforting feeling. Hang sighed in relief. Finding a place to stay in such weather felt like a blessing. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, and a soft bell chimed. Behind the reception desk stood a middle-aged man who greeted him with a calm smile.
"Welcome to the Mountain Moon Inn,"
the man said in a low, steady voice.
"You look like you've lost your way."
"Yes, I have. Do you have a room available?"
"We do. Let me arrange room 104 for you,"
the man replied, taking a brass key from under the counter.
"You're very lucky. Only those with fate can find this place."
Room 104 was simple yet clean. Hang set down his luggage and began to survey his temporary shelter. The room had an indescribable oddness to it. A landscape painting on the wall was perpetually crooked, no matter how he tried to straighten it. Inside the bedside table drawer was a yellowed photograph of a person with a stiff, unnatural smile. The bathroom mirror, under the dim light, seemed to flash shadows that disappeared when he looked directly. "Are there other guests here?" Hang asked the innkeeper later that evening.
"We don't have many guests,"
the man replied with the same calm smile.
"but those who come are all meant to be here."
Late at night, Hang lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, pacing back and forth. Even more unsettling, his door lock jiggled faintly, as if someone was trying to open it. Holding his breath, he waited a long while before mustering the courage to open the door, but the hallway was empty, bathed only in weak moonlight streaming through the windows. The next morning, Hang decided he needed to leave this unsettling place, but his car wouldn't start, and his phone still had no signal. With no other choice, he wandered the inn, hoping to find help. At the end of the first floor, he found an unlocked storage room. Opening the creaky door, he gasped at what he saw. The room was filled with old suitcases and shoes, as though abandoned for decades. In a corner, he discovered a moldy journal. Flipping through its pages, he saw entries written by different innkeepers over the years. Though the handwriting varied, the content was eerily similar.
"Welcome to the Mountain Moon Inn, the only path to the final rest. Room 104 still has a guest who hasn't been sent off. My duty is to complete the final reception."
What shocked Hang most was the dates of the entries. They were all from the 1950s, yet the ink and paper looked fresh, as if written recently. Uneasy, Hang returned to his room and examined the old photograph again. This time, he noticed more details. The background was unmistakably room 104. Even more unsettling, the person in the photo carried a backpack identical to his own. In faded ink on the back, it chillingly read, "Welcome back." He entered the bathroom and tried to open the cabinet behind the mirror. As the mirror swung open, he froze. Behind it was not a cabinet, but a window. Through the window, he saw countless shadowy figures wandering outside the inn. Rushing to the front desk to confront the innkeeper, Hang found the entire inn deserted. On the desk lay a set of old keys, with the key to room 104 resting quietly among them. Back in his room, he was horrified to find his backpack had somehow aged, now worn and tattered. On the floor lay a pair of ancient shoes, clearly from decades ago. He desperately tried to break the window to escape, but outside was nothing but endless darkness, devoid of even a glimmer of light. In his despair, he noticed the wallpaper peeling from the walls, revealing countless claw marks beneath, as if left by those who had tried to escape before him. Searching frantically, Hang found a rusty iron box under the bed. Inside was a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, all reporting mysterious disappearances in the area. The topmost article, dated 1953, had a chilling headline: "Mountain Region Disappearances Solved. The culprit is a centuries-old tree." The article revealed a chilling truth. A 1,000-year-old tree in the area fed on human life. The locals built the inn to lure travelers to feed the tree. Hang's hands trembled as he recalled the abandoned luggage and the wandering shadows. Worse, every clipping showed photos of victims who had stayed in room 104. Suddenly, the room's temperature plummeted. The wallpaper writhed, and countless withered branches emerged from the walls, clawing toward him. Beneath the floorboards, he saw massive tree roots pulsating, and the crooked paintings twisted into grotesque faces. The innkeeper appeared at the door, his body cracking to reveal layers of bark beneath. "Do you know why this place is called the Mountain Moon Inn?" he rasped. "Because only on a full moon does the tree hunger." Hang tried to run, but the roots wrapped around his ankles. Outside the window, a colossal tree loomed in the moonlight, its trunk covered in faces twisted in agony. The faces of former guests. Their souls were trapped forever, feeding the tree. As the shadows screamed and claw marks oozed dark liquid, Hang felt his life force draining away. His vision blurred, and just before everything went dark, he saw his own face slowly merging into the walls, becoming part of the endless cycle. The Mountain Moon Inn still stands on the desolate mountain road, waiting for the next lost traveler. On full moon nights, faint cries can be heard from its direction. And that ancient tree grows taller in the darkness, its branches heavy with new faces,